Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 171. Chapter 171. After his interview with Pierre in Moscow, Prince Andrew went to Petersburg, on business, as he told his family, but really to meet Anatoly Kuragin, whom he felt it necessary to encounter. On reaching Petersburg, he inquired for Kuragin, but the latter had already left the city. Pierre had warned his brother-in-law that Prince Andrew was on his track. Anatoly Kuragin promptly obtained an appointment from the Minister of War and went to join the army in Moldavia. While in Petersburg, Prince Andrew met Kutuzov, his former commander, who was always well disposed toward him, and Kutuzov suggested that he should accompany him to the army in Moldavia, to which the old general had been appointed commander-in-chief. So Prince Andrew, having received an appointment on the headquarters staff, left for Turkey. Prince Andrew did not think it proper to write and challenge Kuragin. He thought that if he challenged him without some fresh cause, it might compromise the young Countess Rostova. And so he wanted to meet Kuragin personally in order to find a fresh pretext for a duel. But again he failed to meet Kuragin in Turkey. For soon after Prince Andrew arrived, the latter returned to Russia. In a new country, amid new conditions, Prince Andrew found life easier to bear. After his betrothed had broken faith with him, which he felt the more acutely the more he tried to conceal its effects, the surroundings of which he had been happy became trying to him, and the freedom and independence he had once prized so highly were still more so. Not only could he no longer think the thoughts that had first come to him as he lay gazing at the sky of the field of Austerlitz, and had later enlarged upon with Pierre, and which had filled his solitude at Boguchavaro, and then in Switzerland and Rome, but he even dreaded to recall them, and the bright and boundless horizons they had revealed. He was now concerned only with the nearest practical matters unrelated to his past interests, and he seized on these more eagerly than in the past. It was as if that lofty, infinite canopy of heaven that had once towered above him had suddenly turned into a low, solid vault that weighed him down, in which all was clear, but nothing eternal or mysterious. Of the activities that presented themselves to him, army service was the simplest and most familiar. As a general on duty on Kutuzov's staff, he applied himself to business with zeal and perseverance, and surprised Kutuzov by his willingness and accuracy in work. Not having found Kuragin in Turkey, Prince Andrew did not think it necessary to rush back to Russia after him. But all the same, he knew that however long it might be before he met Kuragin, despite his contempt for him, and despite all the proofs he deduced to convince himself that it was not worth stooping to conflict with him, he knew that when he did meet him, he would not be able to resist calling him out, any more than a ravenous man can help snatching at food. And the consciousness that the insult was not yet avenged, that his rancor was still unspent, weighed on his heart and poisoned the artificial tranquility which he managed to obtain in Turkey by means of restless, plodding, and rather vainglorious and ambitious activity. In the year 1812, when news of the war with Napoleon reached Bucharest, where Kutuzov had been living for 2 months, passing his days and nights with Wallachian women, Prince Andrew asked Kutuzov to transfer him to the Western Army. Kutuzov, who was already wary of Bolkonsky's activity, which seemed to reproach his own idleness, very readily let him go and gave him a mission to Barclay de Tolly. Before joining the Western Army, which was then in May encamped in Drissa, Prince Andrew visited Bald Hills, which was directly on his way, being only 2 miles off the Smolensk high road. During the last 3 years, there had been so many changes in his life. He had thought, felt, and seen so much having traveled both in the East and the West, that on reaching Bald Hills, it struck him as strange and unexpected to find the way of life there unchanged and still the same in every detail. He entered through the gates with their stone pillars and drove up the avenue leading to the house as if it were entering an enchanted sleeping castle. The same old steadiness, the same cleanliness, the same stillness reigned there. And inside there was the same furniture, the same walls, sounds, and smell, and the same timid faces, only somewhat older. Princess Mary was still the same timid, plain maiden, getting on in years, uselessly and joyously passing the best years of her life in fear and constant suffering. Mademoiselle Bourrienne, with the same coquettish, self-satisfied girl, enjoyed every moment of her existence, and full of joyous hopes for the future. She had merely become more self-confident, Prince Andrew thought. De Sales, the tutor he had brought from Switzerland, was wearing a coat of Russian cut, and talking broken Russian to the servants, but was still the same narrowly intelligent, conscientious, and pedantic preceptor. The old prince had changed in appearance only by the loss of a tooth, which left a noticeable gap on one side of his mouth. In character, he was the same as ever, only showing still more irritability and skepticism as to what was happening in the world. Little Nicholas alone had changed. He had grown, become rosier, had curly dark hair, and when merry and laughing, quite unconsciously lifted the upper lip of his pretty little mouth, just as a little princess used to do. He alone did not obey the law of immutability in the enchanted sleeping castle. But though externally all remained as of old, the inner relations of all these people had changed since Prince Andrew had seen them last. The household was divided into two alien and hostile camps, who changed their habits for his sake, and only met because he was there. To the one camp belonged the old prince, Mademoiselle Bourrienne and the architect. To the other, Princess Mary, de Sales, little Nicholas, and all the old nurses and maids. During his stay at Bald Hills, all the family dined together, but they were ill at ease, and Prince Andrew felt that he was a visitor, for whose sake an exception was being made, and that his presence made them all feel awkward. Involuntarily feeling this at dinner on the first day, he was taciturn, and the old prince, noticing this, also became morosely dumb and retired to his apartments directly after dinner. In the evening, when Prince Andrew went to him, and, trying to rouse him, began to tell him of the young Count Kamensky's campaign, the old prince began unexpectedly to talk about Princess Mary, blaming her for her superstitions and her dislike of Mademoiselle Bourrienne, who he said was the only person really attached to him. The old prince said that if he was ill, it was only because of Princess Mary, that she purposely worried and irritated him, and that by indulgence and silly talk she was spoiling little Prince Nicholas. The old prince knew very well that he tormented his daughter and that her life was very hard, but he also knew that he could not help tormenting her, and that she deserved it. Why does Prince Andrew, who sees this, say nothing to me about his sister? Does he think me a scoundrel or an old fool who without any reason keeps his daughter at a distance and attaches himself to this French woman? He doesn't understand, so I must explain it, and he must hear me out, thought the old prince. And he began explaining why he could not put up with his daughter's unreasonable character. "If you ask me," said Prince Andrew, without looking up, he was censuring his father for the first time in his life, "I do not wish to speak about it. But also, if you ask me, I will give my frank opinion. If there is any misunderstanding and discord between you and Mary, I can't blame her at all for it. I know how she loves and respects you. Since you ask me," continued Prince Andrew, becoming irritable, as he was always liable to do of late, "I can only say that if there are any misunderstandings that are caused by that worthless woman who is not fit to be my sister's companion." The old man at first stared fixedly at his son, and an unnatural smile disclosed the fresh gap between his teeth to which Prince Andrew could not get accustomed. "What companion, my dear boy, huh? You've already been talking it over, huh?" "Father, I do not wish to judge," said Prince Andrew, in a hard and bitter tone, "but you challenged me, and I have said, and always shall say, that Mary is not to blame, that there's to blame. The one to blame is that Frenchwoman." "Ah! He is past judgment, said the old man in a low voice, and it seemed to Prince Andrew with some embarrassment, but then he suddenly jumped up and cried, Be off! Let no trace of you remain here." Prince Andrew wished to leave at once, but Princess Mary persuaded him to stay another day. That day he did not see his father, who did not leave his room and admitted no one but Mademoiselle Bourrienne and Tikhon, but asked several times whether his son had gone. Next day, before leaving, Prince Andrew went to his son's room. The boy, curly-headed like his mother, glowing with health, sat on his knee, and Prince Andrew began telling him the story of Bluebeard, but fell into a reverie without finishing the story. He thought not of this pretty child, his son whom he held on his knee, but of himself. He sought in himself either remorse for having angered his father, or regret at leaving home for the first time in his life on bad terms with him, and was horrified to find neither. What meant still more to him was that he sought and did not find in himself the former tenderness for his son, which he had hoped to reawaken by caressing the boy and taking him on his knee. "Well, go on," said his son. Prince Andrew, without replying, put him down on his knee and went out of the room. As soon as Prince Andrew had given up his daily occupations, and especially on returning to the old conditions of life amid which he had been so happy, weariness of life overcame him with its former intensity, and he hastened to escape from these memories and to find some work as soon as possible. "So you've decided to go, Andrew?" asked his sister. "Thank God that I can," replied Prince Andrew. "I'm very sorry you can't." "Why do you say that?" replied Princess Mary. "Why do you say that when you were going to this terrible war, and he is so old? Mademoiselle Bourrienne says he has been asking about you." As soon as she began to speak of that, her lips trembled, and her tears began to fall. Prince Andrew turned away and began pacing the room. "Ah, my God, when one thinks who and what trash, what can cause people misery," he said with a malignity that alarmed Princess Mary. She understood that when speaking of trash, he referred not only to Mademoiselle Bourrienne, the cause of her misery, but also to the man who had ruined his own happiness. "Andrew, one thing I beg of you, I entreat of you," she said, touching his elbow and looking at him with eyes that shone through her tears. "I understand you." She looked down. "Don't imagine that sorrow is the work of men. Men are his tools." She looked a little above Prince Andrew's head with the confident, accustomed look with one looks at the place where a familiar portrait hangs. "Sorrow is sent by him, not by men. Men are his instruments. They are not to blame. If you think someone has wronged you, forget it and forgive. We have no right to punish, and then you will know the happiness of forgiving." "If I were a woman, I would do so, Mary. That is a woman's virtue. But a man should not and cannot forgive and forget," he replied. And though till that moment he had not been thinking of Kuragin, all his unexpended anger suddenly swelled up in his heart. "If Mary is already persuading me to forgive, it means that I ought long ago to have punished him," he thought. And giving herself no further reply, he began thinking of the glad vindictive moment when he would meet Kuragin, who he knew was now in the army. Princess Mary begged him to stay one more day, saying that she knew how unhappy her father would be if Andrew left without being reconciled to him. But Prince Andrew replied that he would probably soon be back again from the army, and would certainly write to his father, but that the longer he stayed now, the more embittered their differences would become. "Adieu, Andrew. Remember that misfortune comes from God, and men are never to blame," were the last words he heard from his sister when he took leave of her. Then it must be so, thought Prince Andrew, as he drove out of the avenue from the house at Bald Hills. She, poor innocent creature, is left to be victimized by an old man who has outlived his wits. The old man feels he is not guilty, but cannot change himself. My boy is growing up and rejoices in life, in which, like everyone else, he will deceive and be deceived. And I am off to the army. Why? I myself do not know. I went to meet the man whom I despise, so as to give him a chance to laugh and kill me. These conditions of life had been the same before, but then they were all connected, while now they had all tumbled to pieces. Only senseless things, lacking coherence, presented themselves one after another to Prince Andrew's mind. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 171. Hope you enjoyed it. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 171. Adieu, Andrew. You have importuned me, Novatus, to write on the subject of how anger may be allayed, and it seems to me that you had good reason to fear, and in a special degree this, the most hideous and frenzied of all emotions. So begins Seneca the Younger's famous epistle De Ira, written to his brother in an attempt to explain what the passion of anger is, and how reason might conquer it. If only Prince Andrew had such a wise friend to counsel him. De Ira, on anger, seems tailor-made for his current predicament. Had Prince Andrew something so insightful to reflect upon, perhaps he would not have started down the path of tragedy he does today. The first portion of Seneca's letter describes how incredibly mad anger is. It provokes in man the behavior of a rabid beast, and contributes to all manner of misery and suffering. Next, he defines anger as the desire to repay suffering with violence. Is this not precisely what Andrew is up to in today's chapter, as he chases Anatoly Kuragan around the globe seeking his revenge? In fact, many of Seneca's symptoms of anger infect Andrew today. Seneca says that the man possessed by anger is full of resentment, rage, and lust for blood. The angry man has a gloomy brow, a fierce expression, a hurried step, restless hands. Seneca also lists the outcomes of anger: discord, violence, riot, destruction. It's almost as if Tolstoy wrote this chapter alongside a copy of De Ira. Prince Andrew disrupts his life by going back into the army, not out of patriotic duty, but rather out of simple anger. When he returns home on his way west to join the army, he finds that he is extremely irritable, and once again possessed by a weariness of life that overtakes him with great intensity. His disposition is so bad that when he leaves Bald Hills, he does so having alienated his family and on bad terms with his aging father. So what does Seneca say we should do about anger that could possibly help Prince Andrew and ourselves? First, Seneca distinguishes between anger and irascibility. Remember, the Stoics are not, as they are often presented, merely advocating suppression of emotion. They recognize that some emotions are natural, automatic responses to the human experience. It's the continuing assent to these emotions that the Stoic stress we guard against. If we offer our assent, they argue, we'll be endlessly carried away by our natural responses to experience and boil over in a cauldron of passion. Irascibility, then, is the immediate and natural response to a wrong. Anger, with all its aforementioned horrors, is the assent to this reaction. It is irascibility untempered by reason. Reason dictates that an irascible man reacting to a wrong first distance himself from the situation, and then ask if that wrong is within his power or outside his power. If it's within his power, he must do something to change it. If it's outside his power, then he must accept it as the natural course of things and move on. It's clear that this wrong is outside Prince Andrew's power. He has no control over Anatoly and Natasha's action. So how should he move on? First, Seneca argues he should attack anger before it takes him away. He should recognize the social character of humankind and guard against the antisocial viciousness of anger. Then, in the beautiful, tender, and compassionate spirit of Stoicism, he should understand that Anatoly's actions are the ravings of a broken man, ignorantly cut off from his social character. Anatoly, and those like him, therefore, are not deserving of anger, but rather, as Princess Mary says, forgiveness. Daily meditation. Indeed, what reason has he for hating sinners, since it is error that leads him to such crimes? Now it does not become a sensible man to hate the erring. How much more philanthropic it is to deal with the erring in a gentle and fatherly spirit, and to call them into the right course instead of hunting them down. When a man is wandering about our fields because he has lost his way, it is better to place him on the right path than to drive him away. Seneca, on anger. All right, that concludes my reading and reflection on chapter 171 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 172. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.